Welcome to this session of Win-Loss Week. Today we have Garen Hess, the founder and CEO of Consensus and author of Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. We're excited to have you, Garen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Bailey. It's great to be part of the conference. And I'm just going to jump right in. Sorry, you told me that, but I forgot.
That's okay. Thanks so much.
So welcome, everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying the different sessions being shared during this. We've been working with Closed for a little bit, and it's been an honor to participate as part of this event. I love the fact that Closed is doing some thought leadership, and we're excited to share as part of that. So as Bailey mentioned, the topic today is Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. It's about buyer enablement, and the promise that I'm giving you is that it's going to shorten sales cycles. So, hopefully that's something that's of interest to you and anybody that you work with there. Most salespeople know that losing time is losing deals. So the longer a deal stretches on, the more likely it is to fall apart. So you want to keep that sales cycle as short as possible. So as Bailey mentioned, I am the author of a book by the same name and published last year. And the book focuses on a methodology called the Deep C methodology. And so if you want to get into more details, you can always dive into this. And there are some free resources you can download at buyerenablement.io, which redirects to a page of downloads related to the book. And you can get those without purchasing the book if you want. So first of all, just going to have a little guessing game here. I want you to think in your mind about whether or not what you think the answer is to this. So buying B2B software or B2B buying in general, whether it's software or not, is blank, blank, and blank. And I've given you a little teaser here. So what I've come up with and what I really believe is that the current status of buying B2B software is that it's complex, painful, and slow. And the problem is it really shouldn't be that way. What we really want it to be is blank, blank, and blank. See if you can think about what these words are. It's really just the opposite. What it really ought to be is easy, pleasurable, and fast, or enjoyable. Somebody even said fun. Is buying B2B software or B2B buying fun? Rarely. It's a complex, difficult, painful process for most B2B buyers. And our objective, my objective in writing this book is it's all research-based, to try to help sales teams figure out and change their focus and use a framework through which they can focus on enabling buyers and focusing on their buying process rather than on your sales process. And by doing so, you'll close more deals faster. So my promise again is that you're going to shorten your sales cycle, and it can be pretty dramatic. Imagine if you could shorten your sales cycle by as much as 68%. That is some actual data from customers that we've worked with. And incidentally, there are principles that I'm going to share with you that can be used with or without technology, but there's technology that can support this as well. And at Consensus, our company, we build technology that helps support these things. So that's why I'm so passionate about this subject. But you don't need that technology to get many of these gains. It just helps make it even more powerful, and the gains you'll get are even greater. So so that's the promise of this, and I want to show you how we get in there. But before I do, and how we get to that point, but before I do, just to mention the one of the actual customers who has achieved this is a company by the name of Advanced MD. They're a mid-market medical software SaaS company with several hundred employees, maybe over 1,000 now, that sell into doctors' offices. And they had a big challenge because they're selling into these medical systems that have multiple doctors, multiple nurses, office staff, and they all have to get together to make a decision. And this is one of the things that makes B2B buying so complex and difficult. So by implementing buyer enablement approaches and also the technology, they were able to achieve these kinds of results. So wanted to show you the proofs in the pudding to hopefully get you motivated to really not only try to understand, but implement many, if not all of the strategies and tactics that I'm going to share today. So I just start by asking you this question. Is your buying process easy? Is it pleasurable? Is it fast? what would your buyers say if they were to answer these questions? If you gave them a survey, especially by some external firm, such as Closed, that what would your buyers say? Was the process easy, pleasurable, and fast? I would say most people would say probably no on all three. It depends. If you have a B2C product, or if you have a very simple product that's purchased by business users, but it's just individual, then maybe it is a lot easier, pleasurable, and fast. But for bigger, complex solutions, it's usually just the opposite. So in a nutshell, what is buyer enablement? It's really to make buying easier, and by making buying easier, close deals faster. So if we look at a comparison, what companies made retail buying the easiest? When I ask this question to groups, one company in mind comes to the top of the list, and that is Amazon. So no big surprise there. I think we've all been affected by how easy buying has become in retail made by Amazon. And you could argue that Amazon's main competitive advantage is that they've made buying so easy. Most people will buy from Amazon, even if it's more expensive to some degree than other e-commerce vendors. Because instead of taking writing a task down, I need to buy such and such thing, I can just go in the same amount of time, I can go buy it. Now, B2B buying is never going to be that easy, but you can imagine the benefits that accrue to those vendors that make buying easier by looking at Amazon and the impact they've had on retail and the way it affects your own buying behavior. So one other thing to mention on this point is that B2C experiences have affected the expectations and requirements of B2B buyers. They're no longer going to accept that they have to follow your sales process. Instead, you need to help them through their buying process. And the more focus you put on helping them through their buying process rather than forcing them through your sales process, the more effective you're going to be with the new way of buying that is happening. And there are a lot of forces, both the B2C influence, the influence of the pandemic and everything going remote, and all kinds of other things that affect this. But buyers today buy asynchronously. They want to get the information they need as quickly as possible and be guided through the process by somebody who knows what they're doing in a way that makes the whole process fairly straightforward and simple, rather than so complicated and difficult. So speaking of difficult, Gartner put out this graphic, which you may have seen, that shows that while we often think of the buying journey as very straightforward, identify the problem, solution, build some requirements, narrow down the suppliers, make a final decision, it's really this highly recursive, complex mess, spaghetti bowl mess of tasks that the buyers have to do. So the better we understand the challenges that they face and how difficult it is, the better we're able to equip them and enable them effectively. So as I mentioned, some of the things that are changing is B2B buyers are expecting more buying to be more like B2C. And what kinds of things do they want? Buyers find that the most valuable sales interactions are those that provide rich technical detail information that cannot be easily faked. That's at the top of the list. So sometimes we think they first want the value proposition. Well, that's true. They need some kind of value proposition, but they almost always get that off the website, unless your website's horrible. And so what do they want immediately after that? It's really demonstrations of the product. And now you're not going to want to give them the entire demo up front, but they want some kind of peek in there. In fact, Gartner did this research a few years ago that showed that when buyers were asked what is the number one thing that they want from vendors, demonstrations was number one, case studies number two, value assessment tools like ROI calculators number three. And in our own company, we decided when we saw this data, we decided we're going to double down on these top three things. Kind of not forget about these, but just really focus on being really good at these top three things. Of course, demonstrations, because Consensus is intelligent demo automation software. That's kind of our main expertise. So that one we had covered, but we really had to focus on case studies and ROI calculation tools. And by combining these, focusing on these top three things that buyers need and trying to get them in the hands of the buyers as soon as possible, it's been amazing our sales cycle dropped from about 5 to 6 months down to less than 90 days. So, so these things really work. Not only have we seen it in amongst our own customers, but also in our own efforts as we've focused on being better at buyer enablement ourselves. So what else is changing? If you're in enterprise software, one of the things that's changing is pre-sales or sales engineering is more relevant than ever. I think in a lot of ways, sales engineering used to be relegated to late stage conversations, consultations, and considered a bit of a necessary evil from the sales perspective. But buyers, as I mentioned from that Gartner quote, they want content that's rich in technical detail. Well, that's your technical experts, your product experts, which are usually sales engineers or often called pre-sales. So that's another force that's changing in the industry, and we need to address that and try to unlock the content that pre-sales or sales engineers have to help make that available across the funnel. So one of the data points that has come up in a recent study that we did on the sales engineering workload report with over 1,000 people responding, 1,000 sales engineers, is that the wait time from a time a prospect wants a demo and gets a demo is at least a week on the median. So like half the industry reports a week or more, which is a really terrible buying experience. And again, if this is the number one thing that they want and they're having to wait an entire week, and many of the industry, right? Look down here, you've got people waiting 29 days or more. 11 respondents, they're waiting 29 days or more, a month or more to get what they want. So the goal with buyer enablement is to anticipate what the buyer needs before they do, and help deliver that. Because think about it, who knows more about the buying process? Really, you do. As you've led lots of buyers through the buying process, you know more about the buying process than the buyer does. And who's actually in charge of the selling? So you need to be in charge of the buying, but the buyers are really in charge of the selling, because that champion often almost always has to go sell to other stakeholders. So your job is really to equip them and coach them and help them become an effective internal seller. So again, as the reason I'm emphasizing this particular data point is because it's what the buyer wants the most early, and yet they're having to wait. So how can you equip them or enable them to get what they need? So another way to look at the challenges of the buying group is to think about the way that different people have different perspectives. And this sculpture by our artist named Matt, I don't know how to pronounce this, he's French, Mathieu Robert Ortiz. He gave me permission to use this in my presentations and in my book. Shows that the same sculpture looked at from different angles, 90-degree different angles, is a completely different experience, right? Over here it's two giraffes, over here it's an elephant, which first of all, I have no idea how these artists do this kind of thing. It blows my mind. But it's a really good metaphor for how different stakeholders in the buying group are going to look at your deal differently. And you need to understand that. First of all, you need to understand who all the stakeholders are and what's driving their interests most. And be able to adjust not only your approach, but the approach that your champion is going to take as they engage each of those stakeholders and try to sell internally. So again, behind this initial champion are these other stakeholders, and this is what I typically just call the buying group, or sometimes called the buying committee or purchasing committee. And how big is this committee or this buying group? It's been growing and growing. So the challenge is, and really the opportunity is, if you can facilitate, first of all, discover, engage, facilitate, and coach that buying group, that's the essence of buyer enablement. Now you're going to usually do this through this champion, and so you've got to really think about how you work through that champion to do that effectively. And I would argue in some sense that the only way you can get deals done, and B2B sales in a sense, you can define it as facilitating and enabling the buying group, because they're the only ones who can actually close a deal. So speaking of the buying group, how many stakeholders are typically in the buying group? So this has been changing over time, and just 7-8 years ago, it was 5.4 based on research by CEB, and you can see over time how it's grown. There's another research that came out by Gartner that said it's 11 to 12, so who knows, maybe it shrunk just a little bit, but either way, it's more than double what it was even 7 or 8 years ago. So imagine just trying to decide where to go to lunch with 13 to 14 people or 10 plus people. It's an impossible, difficult thing to do with that size of a group just to decide where to go to lunch. Imagine trying to get all of them together to make a massive, technology purchase or something like that that is hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So you can start to imagine how difficult their experience is. So what is another thing that's changing? Buying groups are getting bigger, and they're going to buy from those who help them discover and engage the buying group more effectively. So the better you get at helping your buyers do that, the more often you'll close, and the shorter the process will be. Instead of waiting for the buyer to tell you what that group is, you should be guiding them through the process, because you know more about that group than they do. They'll know the specific individuals, but you should know all of the roles and personas. One of the big challenges is that buyers are spending less and less time with suppliers. So out of all the time they spend making a purchasing decision, they only spend 70% with suppliers. Break that down by, they're talking to 2 to 3 suppliers on the short list, and maybe you've only got 5% of their time that you're working with them in person. So what are you doing the other 95% of the time when they're not engaged with you? How are you engaging them? So this is another massive thing that's changing in the B2B buying world. Buying is now mostly asynchronous, right? They're instead of spending most of their decision-making time with you as a seller, they're spending the vast majority of their time doing other things. So they're going to buy from vendors who educate them asynchronously. So that's really my takeaway there is, if you figure out how to educate them asynchronously, engage them, we call it selling in the gaps, meaning between appointments, what are you doing? So again, going back to this original question that is a fundamental aspect of buyer enablement, how do you make buying process easier? And of course, pleasurable and fast also. But in a nutshell, it's how do you make it easier? First of all, it starts with changing your perspective. Most of us are too concerned about our own world, and we don't think enough about getting into the buyer's mind. I was talking to a customer, and they said, yeah, it's important to keep the buyer in mind. And I said, well, you got to do more than that. You have to have the buyer's mind. So you really need to get in their world. There's this research note from Gartner where they show the prospect's universe, and here is the prospect at the center, and here's you as a vendor out here. We like to think we're right in here, but really they have so many other things going on in their lives and in their work life that you're really out here. And of course, you want to try to bridge that gap, but the reality is that to do that, you have to put yourself in their spot and try to understand all of these areas from their perspective to be effective. So like I said, we need to sell with the buyer's mind, not just with the buyer in mind, right? See how the subtle difference is, this is my world and I'm keeping the buyer in mind. Over here, I am actually in the buyer's world. So who's in charge of the buying process? Like I mentioned, you are as the seller. You've done this more often. Your organization collectively has led hundreds, maybe thousands of people, thousands of purchases through the buying process. So you need to gather all of the ways that make that effective for the buyer and systematize it to help guide the buyer through the process. What's the most effective process through the journey? Who's in charge of selling? The buyer or your champion, right? I often see these t-shirts, I close deals, or I'm a closer, and they kind of make me laugh because I've never met a salesperson that could sign the contract on behalf of their customer, right? They can't. And I'd rather have a t-shirt that says, I'm a buying coach, or my buyers close deals. Like, I'm really good at helping my buyers close the deals, because they're the ones selling. Really, you're the coach. Your champion is like your point guard on a basketball team. You can't go out there on the floor and make points, but your champion go out there and run the plays and try to get the team to score. And you're just there trying to help them do that. So that's the metaphor I like to use. So what's the framework for all of this? I don't obviously have a lot of time to go into the framework, but this is unpacked in the book, Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. And in short, the framework is this, that your whole goal is to help the champion sell internally and get the deal done. And you do that by helping them discover, first of all, you got to discover your champion, then engage and discover the other stakeholders, then engage each of them by equipping the champion with content that personalizes to each stakeholder's unique interests. And then throughout the whole process, you're coaching them in how to most effectively engage those stakeholders. As an example, when we're selling consensus software to our prospects and they say, oh, I need to go talk to the CRO, or I need to go talk to my sales team's counterpart, because we usually sell into the sales engineering team first and through them to the sales team. Well, we have a very specific guidelines on, hey, when you go do that, here's some things that you need to be prepared. These are the questions they're going to ask. These are objections that they might very well raise. Be prepared like this. Here's some materials for you to be able to do that effectively. First of all, here's an interactive video demo that can help automatically personalize and educate them on our solution. And two, when you go to talk to them, they're going to have these concerns and potentially objections. Here's how you handle them, right? So you're almost doing this quick training, providing them with little job aids and things to help them be more effective at that internal selling. So that's your job as the coach. So in summary, and we really just kind of open the lid to buyer enablement here to help you understand what it's all about. But in summary, if you're willing and able to change your perspective, get into the buyer's mind, and implement the buyer enablement framework of discovering, engaging, equipping, personalizing, and coaching the buyer through that process as you engage all those other stakeholders, you're going to have some tremendous results. On a personal note, when I finally put all this together and started working this way in my own deals, my close rate went from 38% to 74%. You know, you may not see that big of a jump every time. You know, this is something that I worked on repeatedly over and over as I was doing the research and understanding. But it was amazing to see how, as I tried to make this process work in my own sales process, how it affected me personally. And these are examples. This is again an example, just to wet your whistle and give you an appetite for wanting to try this, because it is a way of changing the way you go about selling, not only individually but maybe as a whole team. But you can have dramatic impacts across your organization. So again, I want to encourage you to focus your efforts on buyer enablement rather than say sales enablement, right? Ask yourself, what technologies and what processes can we put in place that will enable the buyers to get their tasks done more effectively? And you're going to make it easier, and by consequence, close more deals, and they'll be faster. So that is the end of the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual event here from Closed.
Thank you, Garen. That was so interesting, and I think that everyone watching is going to get a lot out of it. So thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.